Canada's housing continues to get more and more unaffordable. Canadians are struggling to find places to live. And it's Trudeau's fault, as we know. What does he try to do? Pass the buck to Pierre by playing political games. He makes himself look foolish today, saying what he did in the House. I have a few videos that are going to set the tone for this because it is showing Trudeau just does not actually care about fixing the housing problem. We have a video showing how international students are struggling, even though that's part of the problem. And then another video about how Canadians are just desperate to find a place to live and they are looking all over. And I hurt my back in the gym and I'm barely standing right now. And I blame Trudeau for that too. Let's get into today's video.
Depression is the worst thing that I get through from the last 2 months when I went to Canada.
Life in Canada isn't what Aneet Kaur envisioned when she came here from India. Finding an affordable place to live was the first big challenge.
I was facing so much issues because if I'm asking from any landlord for my one-room basement, they are charging so much high from the international students because they know that we don't have any much knowledge.
Short of options.
And those landlords, generally speaking, are from the same background that she is. Every single time I see the postings, the listings, or hear these stories, or walk through the properties as a real estate agent, any of these things, I always see it's the same community. And the reason is, I've said it in other videos, the people who are getting punished from this poor management are the international students who have been lied to all the way back in India. Then they get brought to Canada and they're taken advantage of by other people in their own community who know, like she said, they don't know any better. They don't have enough knowledge of the area.
She found a spot in a 2-bedroom basement suite. In total, 6 students live there. She shares her room with 2 of them.
The room size is too small. How can easily 3 people can live there? Even there is no storage capacity there, so how can I put my storage and stuff there?
She feels there's little privacy or security.
Due to this reason, I just always carry my important documents to my university, also even on my job.
Kaur didn't want to take us to her home out of fear of eviction, but her circumstances are far from unique. A recent Statistics Canada report found that international students were more likely to live in unsuitable housing than Canadian-born students.
And again, we know that the majority of the international students are Indian. I'm not trying to just attack India here. I'm just going off the numbers. Because look at what this says here. The areas where this is happening, what is the high population of these areas?
Surrey had the second highest rate for international students living in unsuitable housing at just over 61%.
Wow.
Unsuitable homes are dwellings with not enough bedrooms.
Students are saying that they are not able to find the proper accommodation, and the houses are not very clean even.
This student-turned-outreach worker is helping launch a center in Surrey that will help students better navigate the local housing market and help them understand their rights.
When I was living in a basement, my landlord just knocked the door and come or something, and not even ask the permission.
Issues Ottawa says it's trying to alleviate through its recently imposed international student cap, which will last 2 years. In the meantime, it says it's working with provinces and schools to come up with a long-term student housing plan.
Yeah, and I mean, the cap is really only because it's been losing steam internationally. Like the cat's kind of out of the bag that, oh, if you go to Canada as an international student, it's not as good as they're telling you. So they were naturally seeing these applications start to fall anyways. But 3 people in 1 bedroom in a 2-bedroom place, there's 6 people in a 2-bedroom. And I have people apply for my units all the time asking for that. And I'm like, no, I can't do it because it's not safe. Because again, when I walk through these buildings owned by these types of people with international students, like they said, they're not clean. Almost every single one of them has cockroaches. They're filthy. They smell bad. And it's like, I'm not blaming the students in particular. I mean, they're the ones who are living like that. So it's, they're kind of at fault. Just clean your house. But at the same time, it's the landlords who are putting them in this position. I think we need to slash international students coming from India almost 100% at this point. We have enough, and at the same time, they're being lied to. They're the ones who are going to suffer, not just Canadians. Yes, Canadians are suffering from this, but they're going to suffer too. And the reason why I wanted to start with this one is because this was an early one showing how bad things can really get. And that's, of course, just for students. But let's listen to how serious Trudeau is about this problem when he's still blaming people from 10 years ago.
Again, that the Conservative leader continues to exploit the very real anxieties of Canadians. When the Conservative leader was housing minister, let's talk about his record. He withdrew the government from cooperative housing. He supported the construction of 0 new apartments, and he gutted affordable housing initiatives and created new bureaucracies. His housing
That's hilarious for him to say, oh, he withdrew government funding. He stopped the government being involved in cooperation with housing. But then he also created new government bureaucracies around housing. It's like you're kind of saying opposite things in those two things. And as well, we want less government involvement in housing. We don't want the government spending money on housing. We want you to cut immigration, not even in half, way more. And then there will be less people coming in, less demand. I've said it in other videos. It's all demand side. And he's blaming him from 9 years ago, even more.
Proposal today continues to fall short. The Conservative leader is simply all slogans and no answers.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
My common sense plan to build the homes would reward municipalities that speed up permits and punish the politicians that get in the way. His approach has not only doubled housing costs, but he's built up Toronto City Hall with monstrous financial transfers so that they can block construction. Mr. Speaker, there have been 50 new tent encampments added in the City of Toronto in 6 weeks. There are 250 tent cities in Toronto alone. Is that his plan, to block homes and put up tents?
One thing that I never thought I'd say this, but I agree with Trudeau on this one, is I personally feel like the slogans that Pierre keeps doing, I think are going to catch up with them. I think Axe the Tax, reach out to the link below if you do want to buy some shirts, but I think Axe the Tax was something that was like, it caught on and he saw it do well. So then he was like, oh, I'm going to make all these slogans. But now all the rhyming and the slogans and all the stuff that he's doing, for some reason, I just have this bad feeling that that's going to bite him in the ass later on.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the so-called plan that the Conservative leader has put forward on housing does absolutely nothing to address homelessness or encampments. What we're actually investing in is hundreds of millions of dollars to help municipalities across the country build more housing rapidly, create the wraparound supports necessary to support people facing homelessness, and continue to be there on the most ambitious and comprehensive housing plan that this country has ever seen. This is part of what we're having to make up for the lost years in which he was housing minister 10 years ago, not creating housing for Canadians, not investing in our future.
So again, blaming him from 10 years ago for not creating housing that wasn't that necessary 10 years ago. The private market was able to keep up with the levels of growth and immigration. Trudeau is saying, we're going to keep spending government money while we keep pumping in bodies so that we can pretend like our GDP and the government is doing okay, because we are not willing to do what is actually needed to be done. And it's very frustrating because it gets into this next video, which is talking about how Canadians are panicked because they can't even live in their own hometowns anymore.
Life has become more affordable for many Canadians. That's not a surprise. And now it seems roughly half of the people who are living in some of our major urban centers say they would consider moving somewhere cheaper. Royal LePage polled people in the 3 largest cities to see who'd be up for relocating. The results right here, 51% of people in the Greater Toronto area say, yep, they would move to find somewhere more affordable. It's 54% in Montreal and 45% of people in Vancouver. So where would they go? Top choice for Montrealers is Quebec City. In Toronto and Vancouver, the top choice is Edmonton. Okay, let's check in with Phil Soper now, President and CEO of Royal LePage.
If you are looking to move, I am a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in the link below. You can work with me or my team all the way across Canada. We can hand select somebody for your area. I just wanted to say that before we had this guy start talking.
Try to put our finger on the pulse of all of these moves. Phil, good to be with you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's go through these numbers on Canadians considering moving. I mean, there's been this general trend, at least here in Southern Ontario, among some elements of the population to sell their homes in bigger cities and buy homes in more rural counties, smaller communities. But what do you make of the fact that this poll tells us it's like half of the populations of these major centers who'd consider perhaps a move.
Yeah, affordability's become one of the major social issues of our time, housing affordability. And the pandemic ushered in a new era of mobility, virtual technologies and business practices, opening people's eyes to the fact that we have some great and much more affordable, call it mid-sized cities. So this is the trends are fitting together. I would caution people, though, that people saying I'd consider moving is not the same as people moving. I know after the 2016 election, we had a huge rise in the number of Americans saying they would move to Canada, but the actual number who did was quite small.
Right.
You know, and I agree with that. Well, first of all, it's a shame that people are in this position now where they think they have to move all the way across the country. And I talked about it in other videos, but there are options. If you can only ride the wave. Unfortunately, we as people, we just have to impact what is in our sphere of influence. And because we cannot control what Trudeau is doing at the top level with pumping in immigrants and all this government spending and making life more expensive, you just have to do what's best for your family. And for most people, it's trying to find an area that they can afford to live. I mean, you know, if you don't speak French, you're probably not going to move to Quebec City because it's a very French city, but that's why the Montreal people think about it. But, you know, these are other more affordable cities. Like Edmonton is a more affordable city still, even though prices have gone up a ton there compared to a bunch of the other major cities. So find what works for you and your family. And I also agree, the amount of conversations I've had with people who said they're going to move, they're going to leave Canada, they're going to do this, but don't actually. You know, it's just a polling.
And that's important to point out. It's kind of the idea of moving rather than, you know, picking
Absolutely.
up and booking the movers and doing it. But let's run through, besides Edmonton and Quebec City, which we mentioned, where are some of the most affordable cities in Canada to relocate?
Yeah, if you look in a big province like ours in Ontario, one of the more remote cities, Thunder Bay, pops out. On the East Coast, Halifax has gotten more expensive over time, but St. John, New Brunswick remains a place where a considerable number of people from central Canada have relocated to since 2020, since the peak of the pandemic. Red Deer in Alberta, Trois-Rivières in northern Quebec, and Edmonton. Edmonton and Winnipeg would be the two larger cities on the list. Most of the others are medium-sized.
The problem with everybody migrating to all these cities is, so we have these super expensive zones, right? But then what happens is these expensive zones are getting backfilled with all these immigrants. So their population keeps growing. And then they move, people, the locals, the actual people who are supposed to be living in those cities, move to the Thunder Bays of the world, which is a really small city in Ontario. And it doesn't take that many people moving to Thunder Bay to increase the house prices, increase the rent prices, and then all of a sudden Thunder Bay starts to become less affordable for the people living there too. And then you get this leveling out of price markets all the way across in all the different areas. So what's going to happen is everything just becomes more expensive, with the more expensive ones just staying expensive. But then because we get so much backfill from immigration, all the people move to these smaller cities, and then those get more expensive, and then it's just a repeating cycle.
I know you're not an urban planner, Phil, but you know it stands to reason that a lot of these cities would be in some way planning for an influx of a population based on this overall trend, whether it's mid-sized cities, bigger cities. You know, is there something that community leaders should be physically doing to prepare for this, migration, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, well, I was giving a talk in St. John, New Brunswick earlier in the year, and this was to a business crowd who, in general, were excited about the migration into the region, because most Atlantic Canadian cities during our lives have donated young people to the rest of Canada. So this reverse trend where people were moving into the region because of affordability, particularly housing affordability, was seen as a positive. But one woman in the crowd actually got really emotional, and she said, you know, my kids aren't going to be able to afford a home because these people from Toronto are moving in with all their money. And so it is a challenge for urban planners. And I can tell you that we have housing shortage issues, not just in Toronto and Vancouver, but in these smaller cities. It's
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is it levels out if you get more people over there, and then now you got families who are going to be separated from each other, and it's more dissolving of the Canadian families and of our support systems. And then people feel like they got to move to Edmonton and build a family, but they're a flight away from their family, so then they're scared about having kids and all these other things. But meanwhile, the immigrants are just coming in.
just the base. The base value of the underlying land is considerably lower than in our largest urban centers. So they're starting at a place, a better affordability, but they have not escaped the issue of an acute housing shortage. So urban planners everywhere are grappling with providing enough roofs for our expanding population.
I don't think this is going to be good for Canadian culture and Canadian society. That's why we need to axe the tax. Click the link down below if you do want to buy a shirt or any of the other items that I have. I am a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in that link below. Thank you guys so much for watching and putting up with my grumpy self with my sore back trying to stand up. I really do appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.